So I'm going to have a go at building a barrel just out of a low poly cylinder. So this is my barrel I'm going to have a go at making. And I'm going to start with a cylinder with not too many segments in it. So I've got a cylinder. It's got 12 rotation segments, 3 height segments, and in the caps I've put an extra segment in the cap. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is make this into an editable polygon. So I'm going to select it and hit C on my keyboard, and we can see that the icon has changed for that object. It's no longer a little cylinder icon, it's a little triangle with points on it. So that's indicating this is an editable mesh, and it means that we've lost our segments and our height and radius settings. We have to change all those manually now. Now, a little bit of a trap. When Cinema 4D makes cylinders and several other primitives, it actually makes them in several parts. It makes the caps as separate objects, and around the body of the cylinder, that's a separate object as well. And I can tell that because if I go into my polygons mode, I'm just going to grab my brush selection tool, which is this pointer in a circle, and I'm just going to paint a selection across the top there. If I move that, I can see the cap is actually not attached to the rest of the body of my cylinder. So this is a little bit of a trick that Cinema 4D has. When you convert some primitives, including cylinders and tubes and cones, I think, they're not always completely connected. So I'm just going to undo that. What I want to do is go back to model mode, which is the entire object. And before I do any modeling, I'm going to go to my mesh menu. I'm going to go commands and optimize down near the bottom. And what that does is it analyzes the mesh. It finds where there are edges that are not connected together, and it just welds them all together into one piece. So it's really important that you do that, especially with things like cylinders and tubes and cones. It's really important you do that before you start modeling. Okay, so I've got my cylinder here. It's all prepped and starting, ready to be modeled. So what I want to do is I want to build this barrel, and if I look at this barrel, it's got some regular detail. It's got these raised kind of lips and some sort of depressed areas around it. And I want to start with this because it's a really easy object, and we're going to deal with edge loops, which are loops of edges that go all the way around a model. And we can deal with these and work with them really easily. So I'm going to go into edges mode on the left hand side. I'm going to grab my scale tool, and if I double click one of these edges, it will select the entire edge loop all the way around that barrel. Now I can scale that edge loop, and it will get smaller or larger. So that's fine, but I need more detail around these edges. I want to try and have a little raised bit with an indentation around it. So I actually need more edge loops. Now I can't add more segments because I've made this into an editable object, but I can cut edge loops into my model. So what I'm going to do is make sure that I'm in polygon mode. I'm going to just deselect, make sure I haven't got anything selected. I'm going to right click in my interface somewhere, and I'm going to use this loop or path cut tool. Once I've selected that, if I run my cursor over the mesh, I'll get a little white loop of polygons that highlight, and I can slide it around, and wherever I click, Cinema 4D will cut a new row of edges into my model. Now I'm just going to cut a row above and below the existing segments that I've got around my model. So I've got 3 rows of points now around this model. So I've got a whole bunch of edge loops just in the areas where I want to add the detail. So now what I can do, I can grab my scale tool. I'm going to go back to edges mode, and I'm going to double click that edge loop, and I can scale it out and make a little raised detail. And I can do that with the bottom part as well, that bottom set of edge loops. And all I'm doing there is just scaling those edge loops out. Now when you scale, be careful to click and drag inside the scale icon. Just be careful. In this case, I want to scale evenly in both axes. So I don't want to be scaling just in the blue axis or just in the red axis. I want to put my cursor just in the middle of this axis indicator and just scale. The other thing you can do is you can use these little angular brackets that you can see around your scale tool. What I'm really doing here is I'm just scaling on my Z and X axes. So I can, if I want to, just click on this little axis here and scale, and it's just going to scale on those two axes. I don't have any height in my selection at the moment, so if I click and drag on the Y axis, it's not really going to do anything. But just be very careful. I don't want to scale just that axis or just that one. I want to make sure that it's evenly scaling on both. So that's a really simple way that we can just cut edge loops into our polygons, and we can double click to select them, and we can scale them around to make a little bit of detail.